Welcome to Digging for Truth, presented by Associates for Biblical Research. I'm your host, Henry Smith. Few sections of the Bible have been as controversial and misunderstood as Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 through 4. Who were the Nephilim? Were they giants? And who were the sons of God? Fallen angels, godly men, or wicked tyrants? On our next two episodes of Digging for Truth, Dr. Tim Chaffey and I will be exploring these questions and more as we survey his book, Fallen, the Sons of God and the Nephilim. Tim, welcome back to Digging for Truth. Good to see you again.
Henry, it's great to see you. Thanks for having me on.
All right, Tim. Well, welcome to Digging for Truth. That's the first thing I should say is you've been on the show to talk about the resurrection of Jesus, Noah's Ark. In the interim, I believe you are now Dr. Tim Chaffey. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's wonderful, wonderful. I'm working on that, but I keep joking around when I get my diploma, I'm going to pick my Social Security check at the same time.
I was happy to say I graduated before I turned 50, which that just happened about a month ago.
Oh, hey.
I've got a T-shirt from a good friend. Everybody needs friends like this that says, I'm a doctor, but not the kind that helps people. So.
Yeah. That's good. That's good. Okay, so yeah, I know the feeling. Congratulations on the Big 5-0 too. So let's start by let's just have you give just a little intro about yourself and tell us why the Nephilim are of such great interest to you since you wrote this gigantic book. Tell us about it.
Yeah, so real quickly, people who've seen me on the show before maybe remember that I work for Answers in Genesis, Ark Encounter, Creation Museum. And so what I want to make sure I'm clear up front that what we're going to talk about in the next two episodes are my own views, because AIG does not take an official position on many of the details in this passage. So don't view that as an endorsement from AIG. These are my own thoughts. It was based on my THM thesis that I completed back in 2011 and then was able to expand it. One of the reasons it was interesting to me is I've been called Nephilim over and over and over again because I'm 6'9", and so many people call me a giant. And you have this passage in the Bible that seems to be talking about them, and I thought, well, let me dive in. It's a little bit weird, and I kind of like things in the Bible that are weird. So, has somebody done some real good scholarly research on this? And when I was seeking to complete my THM, I realized there's not a lot out there. Most of what you have is sensationalistic, and I wanted to avoid that. I wanted a real detailed Bible study on Genesis 6, 1 through 4, and that's what gave rise to the book that you just held up.
Yeah, it's really incredible how 4 or 5 verses in the Bible can lead to 400 or 500 pages of work in a decade of time, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's incredible how rich and deep the Bible can be. Okay, so during the episodes, we're going to put up on the screen at times your translation of these passages to help guide our audience along as we go through it. But the first thing we want to ask is the question from verse 2 is, who are the sons of God? And historically, what have been the three main views that have been out there in both Judaism and the church?
Yeah, I think that's really the key question to understanding the rest of the passage, because if you correctly identify who the sons of God are, then you're the rest of the passage will fall into place. So it's historically the earliest view, as far as we know, going back to the intertestamental writings, Jewish writings, the sons of God were considered to be angelic beings who rebelled against God and came down and married women. They had children with them. These were that were giants, so these would be the Nephilim, and that was really the only view we know of until the very end of the first century, maybe beginning of the second century. And you had a few rabbis who said that they no longer accepted that view. In fact, they held to one that's kind of like a wicked tyrant. I call it the royalty view in the book, where the sons of God were either judges or kings who viewed themselves as divine. And then the third view that came along and actually dominated church history from about the time of Augustine onward, so around 400 AD, is known as the Sethite view. And that is that the sons of God were descendants of Adam in the line of Seth, which were just talked about in chapter 5 of Genesis. And then the daughters of men would be women in the line of Cain, which was talked about at the end of chapter 4. And so you'd have this allegedly godly line of men from Genesis 6 intermarrying with, from chapter 5, intermarrying with ungodly women from chapter 4. So those are the three main views as to the identity of the sons of God.
Yeah, so let's focus a little bit on the Sethite view, because that's the view that I've read about probably the most, generally speaking. And I like the way in the book you walk through the passage to show how you have to keep switching the meaning of the term. In the Hebrew, it's Adam, which is sometimes translated as Adam, but often as mankind. It's used like 4 times in the passage, and you have to keep switching the meaning in order to hold to the Sethite view. Explain that to the audience, because that was really clear to me, contextual, just easy to understand, if you would.
Sure. Yeah. In verse 1, it says that came to pass when men, so mankind in general, when Adam began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born to them. So man is multiplying on the face of the earth, and daughters are born to these men, which is referring to all men generally. Then the very next verse says, the sons of God saw the daughters of men. Well, who would the daughters of men be? Well, naturally, in the context, it's the people that were just referred to in verse 1, the daughters that were born to men in general. But the Sethite view says, no. In verse 2, now it's only daughters of men are only the daughters who are in the line of Cain in Genesis chapter 4. And there's quite a few problems with that in the sense that daughters are never mentioned in Cain's line. Now, surely they had them. There is one woman named at the very end of that line, which is Naamah, who's the sister of Tubal Cain. But in Seth's line in Genesis chapter 5, you have sons and daughters named in every single generation. So if you're going to talk about the daughters of men and you're going to single out one of these lines, why would it not be the line in chapter 5 from Seth's line? And what happened to all the other lines from Adam? He had other sons and daughters. So why is there 2 of them supposedly? And if these men were godly, the Sethite men, why were they constantly marrying ungodly women? Surely it happens once in a while, but why? If they're that godly, why would they keep doing that? But then, as you talk about changing the meaning of that word in verse 3, the Lord said, "My spirit will not strive with man forever." Again, it's back to mankind in general. And then in verse 4, it's the sons of God and the daughters of men. Again, you have to reduce that back to a particular group of men. And so there's no hermeneutical warrant for doing that. It's just, it's arbitrary as to reading that onto the passage. And it's really just to fit this view. And the view was primarily developed because they didn't like the primary view at the time, the one that historically was the earliest one.
Yeah, I thought your exposition of that was a great lesson for the church in terms of the layperson just sitting down, reading their Bible carefully, and just kind of seeing how the immediate context is unfolding, and how you have to be careful about making switches to meanings of words when the context doesn't warrant it. It was really, interpretation 101, and I thought very helpful. Well, believe it or not, Tim, we're at our first break, so we're going to go to that break, and we will be right back.
In a culture of intense Bible-denying skepticism, Associates for Biblical Research exists to strengthen followers of Jesus by affirming the authority of the Bible. Our archaeological fieldwork and original research form a strong foundation in upholding the reliability of the Scriptures for students or anyone asking if they can really trust the Bible. Please visit our website and partner with us by joining our prayer team or financially supporting this ministry. And thank you for standing with us. Watch Lighthouse TV wherever you go. Available on Roku, Amazon Fire TV, and Apple TV. Search Lighthouse TV online on your streaming device or go to our website, lighthousetv.org, for more information.
Hi, welcome back to Digging for Truth. I'm here with Dr. Tim Chaffey, and we're talking about the Nephilim. Who were they? Genesis chapter 6. All right, Tim, we were talking about the Sethite view and some of the problems with just the intertextual interpretation. Would you like to add any more about that view that you see as problematic?
How much time do we have? No, I'm just kidding. Real quickly.
Well, you got to read the book to have it, then you'll get the whole argument.
That's right. We're just getting the tip of the iceberg here on all of these. So if people are like, why didn't they cover this? Well, because there's so much to it. Real quickly, some of the problems with this view is it doesn't explain why, the sin that was so severe that helped bring about the flood. Why would, believer marrying unbeliever? Surely that we know that's not supposed to happen, but it still happens today. It's happened throughout history. It never warranted such drastic judgment from God. And verse 4 tells us that this was happening before the flood and also after the flood. But if all the Canaanites are wiped out in the flood, how does it happen again after the flood? So it doesn't tell us why they would produce giants, which the Nephilim are the result of these unions, as verse 4 tells us. So there are so many problems with the Sethite view. And what I've found is that the primary argument that people use for it is an argument against the fallen angel view. It's not that they're making a case for the Sethite. They're just saying, well, the fallen angel view is impossible because we'll get to it in a little while, but that Jesus says that can't happen, therefore must be my view. Well, there are other views as well, so that doesn't provide an argument for the Sethite view.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Now, the other view, we'll just touch on this real quick, and again, throughout the show, we'll encourage people to pick up a copy of your book, but is the royalty view. Give us a quick synopsis of that one.
Yeah, so that one essentially says that the sons of God were judges or kings who viewed themselves as divine, and their sin was that they were taking wives of whomever they chose. So they were taking women and having polygamous marriages. So they had a large harem, and they're kind of forcing women into these harems. And of course, that's violating, one man, one woman for life. What we see laid out in the early chapters of Genesis, but that's God's design for marriage. Again, why would that warrant such a huge catastrophe of the flood? Because that's happened since the flood and continues to happen. It's not ideal. It's not what's supposed to happen. But that is not what the text tells us. Now, in English, it may look like that when it says that they took wives from whomever they chose. And it sounds really bad in English, but that's just the Hebrew idiom for getting married. So after Sarah dies, Abraham took Keturah as wife. Do we think that he forced her into a polygamous marriage? The next generation, you have Isaac, who took Rebekah as wife, and we know she was a willing bride. She's the one who said she said, "Yeah, I'll go with this man back with Abraham's servant back to meet Isaac and marry him." So she was willing. This was not a forced arrangement. It's just the Hebrew idiom for marriage. And so it doesn't even align with the text. And there's a bunch of other things as far as these rulers viewing themselves as divine. That concept is not as predominant in the ancient Near East as a lot of scholars would have us believe. And so it's very questionable whether or not that's even in the mind of the author here, or that the term could ever really even apply to them.
Yeah, so you would have to necessitate, and we're going to talk about this, that the term sons of God are basically divine kings, or people who view themselves as divine, forcibly taking wives, polygamy, that kind of thing. And that's just kind of foreign to what the text says. But what we want to do now, Tim, because again, we're going to keep saying there's so much to say, but we encourage people to pick up a copy of the book. We're going to talk about the fallen angel view, which has the greatest antiquity, but just is a place where a lot of people in the modern day can't get themselves. And I have to admit, I've struggled with this myself as your transparent host. But let's talk about that a little bit more. And the other question is about the meaning of the word Nephilim itself, because so often we think it means fallen ones. That's what I've been taught. Let's talk about it.
All right, where do you want to start? Should we hit that first?
Let's do it. Yeah. So explain the Nephilim meaning, and then let's go to the fallen angel view broadly.
Okay. Yeah. So Nephilim, you'll see on a lot of websites, a lot of YouTube videos that it means fallen ones, but it does not. You won't find that in any lexicon. You won't find that in any academic commentary. And what they want to use the Hebrew verb nafal, which means to fall, and they want to say, well, if you use this verb and as a participle, then it's going to mean fallen ones. And that's simply not true, because if you're going to use this verb and then convert it to a participle, whether it's active or passive, Hebrew goes through predictable morphology when you do that. And the word would actually become either Nephilim or Nephilim. It does not become Nephilim. And I had somebody go through it and look at 50 different examples in the Bible of verbs changing like that, and it never once followed the vowel pattern of what would need to happen to make it Nephilim. What we do know is from Aramaic, there's a noun, Nephil, which is a singular noun meaning giant. And if you make that plural, it's Nephilim with an N as in Nancy ending, because in Aramaic, the masculine plural has that ending. In Hebrew, it would be Nephilim. And so the word just means giant, Nephilim is plural, so it means giants. And that's how they're described in the passage. That's how that's described later on in Numbers 13 when they're talked about. And that's what the lexicons tell us. That's what the academic commentaries tell us. It just means giants.
Yeah, I had just by default sort of absorbed that view that it had come from the verb. So we had about 45 seconds or so. Give us the quick synopsis of what the fallen angel view is again, just to make it clear of what we're saying, what we think the text is teaching us here, and then we're going to build on that more in our next segment.
Yeah, so essentially what it's saying is the sons of God, the Hebrew is B'nai Ha-Elohim. They came down, they saw that women were beautiful, they took them as wives, they married them and had children with them, and these were the Nephilim, the giants. And what they did was part of the extremely sinful world that existed before the flood. And so it helped precipitate the flood judgment.
Okay. Well, I'm sure that's triggering a lot of questions in the minds of our listeners and viewers. And we're going to explore those questions together, Tim, because in the book you do an excellent job of really exploring all of the different rabbit holes and angles and questions that would come up. So in our next segment, we're going to continue to build on this with our friend Tim Chaffey. We'll be right back. ABR is excited to announce the publication of Volume 2 from our excavations at Khirbet el-Maqadir. The volume details archaeological remains from about 350 BC to the 8th century. This includes a New Testament village that may have been visited by Jesus. Over 400 pages of analysis, photos, and maps. You can pick up a copy today by visiting BibleArchaeology.org.
Digging for Truth is produced and recorded in the studios of Lighthouse TV. Positively different.
Hi, welcome back to Digging for Truth. I'm Henry Smith. I'm your host, and I'm here with Dr. Tim Chaffey. We're talking about who are the Nephilim and Tim's magnificent book called Fallen, which we encourage you to pick up. Okay, Tim, I think part of what we want to clarify is just talk a little bit about the sons of God in the text and the Nephilim are not one and the same. Tell us about that.
Yeah, they're not. If you look at verse 4, it tells us the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, whenever the sons of God, came into the daughters of men, whenever that activity happened, the Nephilim were on the earth as a result of that. So they're two different entities, the Nephilim being the result of that illicit union between the sons of God and the daughters of men. And I think a lot of times people just get confused and conflate those two terms. So I think it's important to clarify that.
Okay, so in our next two steps, we're going to talk a little bit about the term sons of God, the B'nai Elohim, which you talk about extensively in the book. And in our second episode, we'll talk more about it. And also talk about Jesus' statement about the marriage and the angels in heaven, because that is a key objection, but when you look closely at the text, you see something different. So sons of God first, then Jesus.
Yeah, so B'nai Ha-Elohim, which is translated as sons of God, it appears in our Bible 6 different times, 3 times in the book of Job. Job 1:6, there came a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. And Job 2:1, almost word for word, same thing, where Satan is going before God. So he's going with or appearing in the midst of these sons of God, these B'nai Elohim. The other time it's mentioned in Job is Job 38:7, and that's where God is questioning Job, saying, Job, where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth, when I did this? And then he says, when the morning stars shouted for joy and the sons of God sang together, or vice versa. And so that term appears there again when God is laying the foundation of the earth. So human beings were not there at that time. They weren't created yet. These are clearly angelic beings in this passage. And then you look at our passage, Genesis 6, verse 2 and verse 4, that term appears again. And the one other place it appears is in Deuteronomy 32. And it's very clear when you look at the Dead Sea Scrolls, if you look at the Septuagint, if you look at your marginal notes in your Bibles, a lot of times in verse 8, it'll say that God separated the nations according to the number of this. Many of our Bibles say sons of Israel. But if you look at the note, it'll say that the oldest things we have, by far the oldest, say sons of God. And so and it's B'nai Elohim. The Dead Sea Scrolls back this up. So that's the same author. That's Moses telling us that. And they cannot be sons of Israel because Israel didn't exist at the time that it's talking about, the Tower of Babel event. It clearly referring to angelic beings. And there's a lot of textual issues that we don't have time to get into there, but very clearly in the Old Testament, that terminology, B'nai Elohim, refers to angelic beings. And people get confused by that. They think, how can rebellious angels be called sons of God? Because in the New Testament, aren't we called sons of God? Well, that's nearly every case, it's a future reality that we're going to be revealed as that. That's something that positionally we are, but we're not quite there yet. That's not until glorified bodies. But it's a different term. It's Hebrew term versus something in Greek. It is, think of it, it doesn't mean biological. It doesn't necessarily mean they are, biologically descended from God. That's not what it's saying. It's sons of the heavenly realm versus the sons of Adam, which is how Genesis 11 refers to people, the sons of men. So there's a contrast there, the sons of men versus the sons of the heavens, the sons of God.
Yeah, it seemed to me, Tim, in your book, that this was really a key. This term, sons of God, was so critical to understand. Right, you got to get that right, and you got to get it right not only contextually close in Genesis, but canonically across the whole Old Testament canon. And you do a great job of explaining that. The Job passages I thought were particularly. I want to encourage people to open your Bibles, read Job 38, as Tim mentioned, and Job chapter 1 as well. And you can see it in the text that this is what this term means. Okay, so the syllogism thus far would be we have the sons of God marrying the daughters of men. So sons of God are angels, the daughters of men are women, and they produce offspring. Now that is going to lead to a whole bunch of questions, and one of the questions is going to be, didn't Jesus say in the New Testament that that's not possible?
Yeah, so people will always go to Matthew 22:30. This is the number one objection to the fallen angel view, and like I mentioned earlier, the number one so-called proof for the Sethite view, where it doesn't support the Sethite view anyways. But when Jesus is asked by the Sadducees about who would this woman be married to in eternity, when she's married one man, then he dies, she marries the brother, he dies, the brother, and 7 men. And he says, you're mistaken, not knowing the scriptures or the power of God, for in the resurrection they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like angels of God in heaven. So right away people look at that and say, see, Jesus said angels can't do this. No, he did not. He said in this passage, the angels in heaven do not marry. He never said what angels can or can't do. He didn't say what fallen angels who rebel against God and leave heaven or leave their proper abode, as Jude 6 talks about. He never said anything about what they can or can't do. He just said what the holy angels in heaven don't do. And so I think we got to learn to pay close attention to the text and not go beyond that. Because if you look at Luke's version of that account in Luke 20, the parallel passage, same question. Jesus says, the sons of this age marry and are given in marriage, but those who are counted worthy to attain to that age and the resurrection from the dead neither marry nor are given in marriage, nor can they die anymore, for they are equal to the angels and are sons of God. I find it interesting that Jesus says that in that, when we have glorified bodies, that we are equal to the angels and then we are sons of God. Well, is he giving a nod to the fallen angel view here, that sons of God does refer to angelic beings? Well, maybe. I won't use that as my knockdown, drag out argument.
Sure.
But certainly does not rule it out, like so many people think.
Yeah. So now, what I think one of the great lessons here, I mentioned this before, and I'm gonna say it again. We're gonna be wrapping up this episode, Tim, believe it or not, and then we'll move to part 2. There, we want to talk about things like the divine counsel, for example, to explain the sons of God a little bit more. But before we jump in our minds to, oh, that's not possible, or what about the genetics or DNA, and those are things that are in my mind, we got to deal with the text. And I so appreciate your careful exposition of the text throughout your book. So Tim, don't go away, my friend, because we're going to be jumping in on episode 2. And we just do want to mention also that Tim is going to be joining us on the Digging for Truth podcast, which is relatively new. And it's the first time I'm mentioning it to our audience. We carry it on the ABR website. Go there to hear more extensive discussion of various subjects, including Dr. Chaffey, who will come back and really exposit this in depth for us. And today we thank you for joining us for Digging for Truth.